that you're here to talk about today. If I could just make one request, it would be, there's a very nice picture you showed in there, not once but twice. And the first time I saw it, I thought, oh, I hope that comes out of the presentation. And then the second time it came back, when we were in Silicon Valley, and I went down there with a bunch of people from Toronto last year to try and, quite frankly, lure back a lot of very smart people like yourself who were there, who came from Canada. There were hundreds of thousands, 200,000 Canadians in Silicon Valley, many of them educated at U of T and Waterloo. And I went through the sort of sales pitch about Toronto, and I think they found it compelling because they came from here, so they knew a lot of these things. But they did comment on the weather when I was down there. And you had not one but two, the same picture shown twice. It's a very pretty picture, but it has all this ice and snow in it. And so the rest of your presentation will help us. That slide, if you could just replace it, that would be fantastic. I'm not going to send you. Somehow I find, by the way, just on another thing that was in your presentation, somehow I find when I send pictures of myself playing with my grandchildren, it doesn't work as well as pictures of Mr. Trudeau. I don't know why that is. You are who you are. You just have the advantage. Sometimes I feel like I'm his father. Having said all that. And finally, I know you're going to deal with the media today, and how to deal with the media. You're going to get some excellent advice on that. My advice after 2.5 years in this job, just stay away from them. I was with the mayors of Dallas and Fort Worth. They were visiting Toronto the other day. Here's a little known thing. You learn something every day in this business. But the mayors of Dallas and Fort Worth were here, and their #1 trading city in the world is Toronto. And if you ask me, or they said, frankly, if you ask people in Dallas, Fort Worth to guess, what their #1 trading relationship was with another city in the world, they would have guessed all kinds of places closer to the southwestern United States, or some European city, or New York. But it's Toronto, and I think we forget about that. And a lot of it has to do with technology. When I asked, well, what business are we doing? But they were here for that reason. But they, in the course of I gave a news conference with them, and then of course when I give a news conference, the media will ask about all kinds of other things, so they saw me answering questions on marijuana and food trucks. And they said, well, what was that all about? And I said, well, that's just what you have to put up with. I mean, when I say put up with it, it's part of the process. I want to say thank you to Jody for having the wherewithal to together with supporters like Osler. And there would have been a day when I was practicing law at Tory's where I would have said, Osler, well, it was nice kind of, sort of not your firm, but they've shown great leadership in standing behind this, as we have done as the city. We're also a founding sponsor or supporter of this organization. But I will tell you something, that this is very important, and what was very interesting in Raquel's presentation, and she and I have only shaken hands before, so I haven't had any chance, not that I'd be successful if I tried, to influence what she said about Toronto. But what she said about Toronto is so true. In terms of what people think about the city and why we're likely to be able to attract them here. I mean, the #1 reason I would say is the existing pool of talent, now including, fortunately, people like Raquel and many others, including you in this room. When I go to India or to China or to Israel representing Toronto and trying to sell people on coming here, they actually know very little about our economy and about our city. In fact, you probably had the experience of having visitors come here to see you who haven't been here for 10 years or never been here at all, and they're amazed at the size of the city. I kind of look at them when they say, well, this place is so big, and I sort of think, well, if you sort of look at the statistics, I mean, we are the 4th biggest city in North America, but they don't know that, and they don't know that when the city is so big, it's going to have a very substantial economic infrastructure here in terms of our financial services sector and our life sciences sector and so on. You know the list. Many of you are a part of that in one way or another. What they do know about the city in all of those countries, without an exception, to an extent, is the way we live together here. And they don't know in detail about it, but they've heard something somewhere or read something somewhere about how we have established a city here where there is greater respect paid to people because of the fact that they're different and come from a different place and perhaps have a different faith or a different sexual orientation or whatever. And that we treat people with respect. We're not perfect, but that we embrace people and celebrate those differences. And I think it's become more and more and more relevant as the rest of the world has, for whatever series of reasons, turned inward, and the world has kind of become a more polarized sort of place. I was on a panel last week in Chicago with a bunch of mayors from around the world, and the question that was first put to the panel, and I sort of was last because I was at the end, was, well, how are you managing with all the tensions in your cities? And of course the tensions was an allusion to either tensions based on ethnicity or faith that are happening in a lot of other places, sometimes even stoked by people in positions of leadership, as unbelievable as that may seem to us. And I said, when I got to my turn to speak, I said, well, actually, we're not perfect, but we don't have those tensions. I said we do have a challenge in front of us in terms of the stratification of our society here, where there are increasing numbers of people who are struggling to try and have access to opportunity, and others who are much more comfortable, and that's a challenge for us, and it could produce tension down the road if we don't address it, and that's something that I'm very focused on trying to do with my colleagues in other governments. But I said we don't, and that's just because of this society we've been fortunate enough to build. I'm not sure of the reasons for it. That's a subject for an academic paper that would be written by somebody else. But I think when you put up values there and the way we live here, I think it's a reflection of something that is one of our principal selling features. It's one of our greatest assets that we have, and I think that's why we have to preserve it, and it's why we have to go out and sell it to people. Why is it important in this sector that you're all a part of? Because this sector represents the future, and I believe it represents the future in two respects. I mean, you expect politicians to stand up and say these things. It represents the future. It does, because not only does it represent the future in terms of the enterprises that you all are forming and are a part of, and that are such an important part of our economy in and of themselves today, but also because they represent ultimately the future success of our financial services businesses and of our life science businesses. The pace of change is so rapid in every business or every part of government or anywhere you want to turn, that if we're not on top of that, and on top of it doesn't just mean we sort of import people or have people come in and say, well, if you just, or hire a consultant and say, if you just implement this or buy this this application or implement this software, you're going to be able to keep up. It means we have to nurture that kind of spirit of innovation, that kind of home for innovation. And when we talk about Uber, I've often said to people that people sort of, I took some lashings for the fact that I stood in and said, instead of trying to ban Uber, which they did in many other cities, and they've done it, I guess, successfully, both in that today you can go to cities where Uber doesn't exist because they sort of resisted having them come in under pressure from the taxi industry. And I understood the dislocation of the taxi industry, but at the same time I also understood that you can't turn back the hands of time, and that you can't, if you try and resist technology that makes people's lives better, people will speak on their own. I mean, 400,000 people had signed up to use Uber in Toronto before I got involved, and I simply took a look at that and said, well, we have two ways we could go here. Try and turn back the hands of time and push disruptive technology out of the city, or embrace it, regulate it fairly, give the cab industry a chance to make sure it has its place. And I chose the second course, and I will choose that course as long as I'm the mayor over and over again, because I think it's the right course for the future to choose, and it takes advantage of the talent that exists in this room and elsewhere. The talent pool is something as well, when Raquel mentioned it, that is known, although people are astounded when they get here at the diversity of the city. Again, the mayors of Dallas and Fort Worth said they were just walking on the street, and you can see, of course, the diversity that is Toronto. I think it's a concept of diversity that is stunning to almost anybody from anywhere else. Again, on the same panel, they talked about London and New York as being cities that had 40% of the people who live in those cities born outside of the country. Here, as you know, the number is 51%. And I think that has been a huge blessing for us in terms of a whole bunch of things, including the very decision that some companies have made to locate parts of their operation here, because there is no other place in the world where they can get the diversity of people to help them do their job that you can get here in the city of Toronto. And when I was, we had 150 Indian companies that were here this past week. My friend Mark Cohen, I think, was there as well. He's the head of Toronto Global, and I'm delighted he's here today. And they, one of the things that I was able to say to them, and I could say it with a straight face, was that anybody who comes here from around the world will feel at home in Toronto. And it's not just because of that embracing set of values, but it's because there are other people who have settled here and chosen to come to Toronto and come to Canada who are like them. And I speak often of a company called Paytm from India, and it's one of, by far, their biggest kind of e-commerce payment platform that has, numbers of customers we can't even comprehend here because of the population of India. But they chose Toronto to have their fraud detection, their global fraud detection operation, which involves a lot of the use of AI to pick up on things that they need to pick up on to maintain the integrity of their platform. They chose here, and they started 2 people in a public library. They had no office, they had no money. Today they have 50 people that are highly educated people working for them. They expect that number to grow to 100 this year. And they chose Toronto, again, as the second place in the world. It's the first place in the world outside of India, second place in the world, to launch their platform. And so the diversity of Toronto is a huge selling point above and beyond our values. So all of this places us at a moment in time. And as you say, by definition, moments in time pass. But Toronto right now, I think, as you would know, is a place that everybody wants to come and see what's going on here. It's partly because of the AI expertise. It's partly because of the fact we've attracted people of global reputation, because firms of global reputation have chosen to do things like Uber and Paytm and others are doing. But the problem with moments in time is they only last for a while. I mean, you know that, especially in a fast-changing world, that Toronto is very hot at the moment in terms of people wanting to come here and wanting to invest here. But it doesn't last. And so if we're going to make it last, though, there are things we can do. We can continue to be very respectful of diversity and make sure we continue to be a place that's welcoming, and that while the world is closing its mind in many respects and closing its arms, we open our arms even wider and open our minds and keep our hearts open. And that's why something like refugees was so important, even to establishing our reputation as a place to come and invest. And it's why support for the arts is important, because it feeds in to the general impression people have of a place that welcomes innovation. But so too is respect for and action that we can undertake to actually promote diversity. And while even looking across this room, I can see that in terms of the backgrounds originally of many of the people in the room is not badly represented. And of course, it is overrepresented, when I say overrepresented, in terms of women because of the nature of this event. But to be candid, most of the events I go to that are tech events in the city that are about this sector underrepresent women, and frankly underrepresent diversity in its fullest sense. But in particular, you notice when you go to these rooms and go to these events, an underrepresentation of women. And that is, as Raquel said, as Jody said, it is not a smart thing for us to be doing, aside from it not being right. And it's not smart simply because we are denying ourselves by not having in those rooms the full pool of talent that we have access to in the city. And so one of the small things that I think we can do, and by we I mean 2 or 3 of us in the city who are in positions of leadership, is that we, and today I'm making this pledge on behalf of 2 colleagues who aren't here. Michelle Holland is at the London Technology Summit they're having there representing Toronto. I can't get away with traveling too much. They sort of watch where I go. Oh, what are you doing going over there? And they think I'm going to London to a tech summit to sit there with drinks with umbrellas in them and at your expense, have a good time. Anybody who's traveled with me would know that you don't want to come on one of the triple Jody's. With me, Margaret, I sort of say you fill up every minute of every day because then I can justify it. But she's there, and Michael Thompson is also not able to be with us today. He's the head of economic development for the city. But what we're going to do as a small thing, and we're going to make it very well known to people in the tech community, we're going to prioritize the events that we show up to support, the places we go to speak, the things we host at the City Hall, based on people demonstrating to us that they have a real commitment to encouraging diversity in the people that they have on their panels, diversity in the people in their membership, and that they have made a real effort to make sure they include women and include people from all diverse backgrounds. It's not a quota system. It is simply saying, look, I mean, we are one of the most diverse cities in the world. We know that long before diversity became a word that described Toronto, the population of Toronto was and is 50 or 51% women. We know that our education system now is such that people are going to school and getting the same kind of higher education and have the same sort of brain power, albeit that, as Jody said, it's a different way of thinking sometimes that you should make sure you have available to you if you want to be the best. And so we're simply going to say to people that we want that to be represented in the public face that we put to the world on these technology events. And I hope other leaders take this pledge up as well. It's a way of just saying, look, think about these things before you put on the program, before you draw up your guest list, before you have your panels. We were talking a little bit before I came in the room, and I used to co-chair something called the Diversity Program in Toronto, which was meant to increase the representation of all groups who were part of our diversity, including women. In different places. And I remember when we said, well, we were going to make it more possible for the media to have more diverse representation in terms of what you see on TV. Because if you think about it, what you're likely to see, say, on the healthcare matter on TV, talking about the latest developments in heart care, is a white man who's a doctor. And when we went to the media and said, look, we have to change that because, among other things, it will more fairly represent the people who are actually leaders in these fields, but also it's important for girls, for example, young girls, to see on television somebody that's a heart doctor who is a woman. And you could go on from there to talk about not just girls generally, but also for people who are from diverse racialized communities to see people. So the initial reaction of the media was to say, oh, well, we'd be happy to do that. We really believe in all that, but we just can't find any black doctors or any brown, scientists or women who are, in technology. So what we did is we just made up a list for them. We said, fine, it's not a program, not a problem. And in